My name is David McLeod, and I am your life mastery coach and author of the delicious little book, A Life to Die For. I'm also one of the co-authors in the best-selling series, The Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care, and also the lead author in an upcoming new book called Gifts of Wisdom, Practices for Healing and Empowerment. That book will be published officially on October the 7th this year, and I'm really excited, not only because it's the first time I've been a lead author on one of these collaborations, but also because my guest today is one of my co-authors. So this is really exciting. So anyway, welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. This is episode 252, and today our topic is called Yoga for Renewed Living. Now, finding balance and maintaining well-being can be challenging, especially for anyone dealing with chronic illness. For many people, the journey to physical and mental wellness often requires a tailored approach that considers the unique challenges they face. Yoga has long been recognized as a powerful tool for promoting physical and mental health. Its gentle movements, focused breathing, and meditative aspects provide a holistic approach to wellness, making it an ideal practice for individuals with chronic conditions. Research shows that yoga can improve flexibility, strength, and balance, which are crucial for preventing falls and maintaining mobility as we age. Moreover, yoga's emphasis on mindfulness and stress reduction can significantly benefit mental health, helping to alleviate symptoms of anxiety and depression that often accompany chronic illnesses. For today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Denyse LeFever, a yoga therapist with a wealth of experience working with seniors. Denyse has dedicated her career to helping people with chronic illnesses rediscover their vitality and live fuller, more active lives through the transformative practice of yoga. So please join me in welcoming Denyse LeFever to the program today.
Thank you so much, David, for that lovely introduction and for hosting me on your show today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. I know this is your first time, and that's terrific. That's wonderful. And, one of the things that I try to do here on Life Mastery TV, I just want people to have a good time and learn something while at the same time being maybe entertained and enlightened at the same time. So that's really what I hope to achieve here. And I just want to say welcome to the folks who are here on the live presentation. If you have comments or questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond to those as we proceed. So Denyse, you have been involved in yoga for quite a few years now. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share a little bit about maybe your personal journey that led you to discover yoga and what it is that made you realize that this was the right path for you.
Thank you, David. I actually talk about this in your book, but my first experience actually was when I was about 16, 1970. I was, I guess, just learning how to drive. So that's kind of how I frame it in my mind. And I was preparing for all of the testing at that time that you had to do for college. And I was a nervous Nelly, just really, really beside myself. My mother was very concerned that I was going to have a nervous breakdown before I even applied to schools. So she sent me to an adult school at our high school that was teaching yoga. Now, I grew up in the Philadelphia area. And the Philadelphia area in the 70s was ripe with several Indian gurus, one of whom is the founder of Kripalu. We had the Himalayan Institute up the street. And University of Pennsylvania had a bunch of traveling Indians. So when I was learning this, I didn't know the history of yoga, but the profound effect I felt got me curious. And after taking the movement class, I decided to explore the spiritual and meditative aspects because at the time I was also very dissatisfied with my religion of birth, which was Catholicism. And this was the height of the Vietnam War. So a lot of the values the church was talking about from the pulpit just did not align with me as a young woman growing up. And that is the journey that really started it. Now, I would say I was very active in both the movement and meditative aspects of yoga, probably to my mid 20s. And then all of a sudden, I realized I had to live, which meant I had to earn a living. And as much as my dream was to go live on an ashram, I was really too practical. And by accident, I ended up in the defense industry. And that was a place where you didn't mention yoga. So I was a closet yogi, and that became my escape whenever I needed to balance out my life. But there were very few people I worked with that knew what I was doing. So I kind of went underground, if you will. I continued to escape to retreats and trainings. And then as I approached my retirement years and was becoming, I mean, I loved my career, so I don't want to sound like I was bitter or anything, but we were going through organizational changes, and I thought, this isn't really this career that I started in that I love, that has taught me so much, isn't serving me as well. I started to have illness. My father was going through dementia at the time, and I had a major health crisis myself. And in that crisis, I thought, man, the last time I felt good was when I was doing yoga. And I had started when I moved from a very rural area to DC right about the time that all this was happening. And I decided in the move, which was very stressful, to go to a yoga class. And I realized how much my body had changed, how much my mind had changed. It was really hard for me to move with flow. And it was really hard for me to silence my mind or to become calm. And so when I was healing, I remembered the last time I felt balanced was when yoga was a more active part of my life. And as a result of a surgery I had where the doctor had told me I would not be able to do yoga again, nor would I be able to golf again because it was a foot surgery. He just didn't feel that I could do yoga. I decided, rebel that I was, that was not satisfactory. And I reached out to my yoga teacher and I said, I don't want to teach, but I want to learn more about this practice because I'm seeing firsthand that there's benefits that I need as an older person now with a chronic condition. And I need to understand better why these practices are restorative and what I can do to learn more so that I can age more healthfully. And so that's really how I got back into it. And then I ended up retiring from my career as we went through another organizational change. I raised my hand for an early retirement right about the time I started my yoga teacher training. And you'll appreciate this as a former Air Force guy. One of my mentors was an Air Force colonel. And prior to my volunteering to retire, he had said to me, Denyse, I'm worried about you. You're really stressed out. You need to do something. And it was at that moment that I decided to do the training. And I came back from our holiday and said, hey, I want to share with you, you're the credit here. I really took your words to heart. I knew the organization change was coming. I had just created a team that I was dedicated to, and I was feeling guilty about moving on, but I knew that the organization was going to change and that team wasn't going to be there anyway. So I needed to make the decisions for me. And I came back and told my colleague, well, I took your recommendation to heart and I signed up to be a yoga teacher. But I'm not going to teach, I'm just taking the training. And a lovely, lovely person, he kind of sat back in his chair, put his arms behind him and said, Denyse, I love you like a sister, but until you retire, I don't think you should tell anybody that. You might lose your clearance. So that was the kind of the world that I grew up in.
Wow.
Now,
that's interesting. I'm just curious, why would yoga be a security risk? I've never understood that. What's the thinking there?
I think this is antiquated thinking because one of the biggest organizations that has embraced yoga is the VA because of the profound effects that they have found that yoga has, and I-rest meditation, which I have a certification in particular on PTSD and returning veterans. So there's a real gap of what I'll call the Vietnam era veterans and those
Right.
that served in enduring freedom in Iraq and Afghanistan. When I would
Oh,
run into,
right.
because
Right.
my
Mm.
final career, I ended up consulting for about 10 years before I said, okay, now I'm going to be a yoga teacher. I actually worked in the area of counterterrorism. And the majority of people that I met were former British or American soldiers who had served in either Afghanistan and Iraq. And they all thought it was cool when I would say that I was doing yoga. My
Right.
generation and older than me, it was still associated with cults, with religion.
Right.
It
Yeah.
wasn't understood.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating, and quite the journey that you took. I mean, there's a lot of information in what you said that I'm kind of jumbling around in my mind. One being, I find it interesting that Western medicine has moved to this point where everything is about drugs and surgery. It's very rare that anybody in Western medicine will suggest something like yoga or acupuncture or something that's maybe not on the main menu, so to speak, you know? Uh, and yet, and also I really hate when anybody in the medical profession says, if I do this for you, you will never do that again, which, I mean, that's complete bullshit. And that it
Right.
really, it's not true at all. Look at how many, well, right now we've got the Paralympics going on. Look at how many people with so-called disabilities can do things that you and I wouldn't even dream of doing. It's,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And I think that that is the joy that returning to yoga later in life has shown me.
right,
It's the humility of accepting your body as it is, knowing that you are more than that,
right.
and knowing that even with what some people may consider a limitation, you can still move, you can connect to your true self, and you can still find what I call renewed living or joy in life, no matter what is going on in the physical realm.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And I'm going to tell you an interesting story. Back in the late 70s, early 80s time frame, my mother started to become interested in yoga. And she, with her interest in yoga, became one of the first people in North America to be certified to teach the BKS Iyengar method of yoga. And in
Wow.
fact, I remember while I was living in Edmonton, Alberta, she actually invited Iyengar to come and visit. And he came and visited at her house in Edmonton for 2 weeks or something. What an amazing man. I tell you, I fell in love with that guy the first time I met him. He had such amazing energy about him, and some of the moves that he could do. Oh my God. He blew my mind with some of
Well,
and he didn't even show me the
actually,
hard stuff.
absolutely. Well, it's interesting you mention Iyengar, because Iyengar is from what is known as the tradition of Krishnamacharya, which
Right,
has he was the original trainer of a lot of these Indian teachers who also have really led the way for yoga to be accepted in the medical community.
right,
And one of them, Desika Shar, a lot of the modern people who have worked with chronic illness and whatnot came from that tradition. So I think the thing to recognize is that that tradition is a healing tradition, even though you have the extreme postures that Iyengar himself taught. There are adaptations that
right,
still enable you to do what's often called in yoga the intent of the pose. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to achieve? And
right,
it doesn't
right.
have to be that specific physical posture that you may see in the books.
Yeah, that's interesting. At that point in time in my life, uh, I hadn't really begun doing my own personal growth work at that point, and so I still had a kind of a love-hate relationship with my mom, and I was very much in a rebellious state. So when she mentioned yoga as a way for me to go, naturally I was a no, not a chance, no way, I'm going to do that. But at the same time, she didn't want me to do meditation, so I did that. I was just completely contrary. Uh, But what's interesting is I chose the path of, high aerobic workouts, running, swimming, sports fitness kind of stuff. And I was actually very good at it, to the point where I got myself, in 1997, I did my first and only marathon run. And I had been running like crazy, probably running 40 miles a week on average, and to get myself ready for this marathon run. And I had not been doing any proper stretching of any kind. Well, minimal, I'll put it that way. Just enough to kind of say, okay, I run for an hour and a half and then stretch for 3 minutes, like, wow, that's really going to help. But I wasn't thinking in proper terms back then. Anyway, I did my marathon, injured my Achilles tendon, which then had an impact on my knees and my hips on the right-hand side. So I really couldn't run anymore. So I had to do something else. And I was in such pain that it wasn't until 2006 that I finally agreed, okay, I'm going to try yoga, see what happens. And oh my God, what a difference. Now there were, just to give you an example, what's a good example? Sun salutation type move, let's say, that involves the down dog as part of its position. I'll tell you, I could barely bend over to that position. And then, but I persisted. I just kept trying and trying and trying. And every day I would get like a millimeter further into my pose. And after a while, one day it just happened. And I got into this pose of down dog. And I thought, so that's what it feels like. And my God, the relaxation and the opening that happened as a result of that, I said, oh my God, this is amazing. Why did I fight this for so long?
I think that's a great story, David. I mean, I was thinking about this talk because so often what I realize, even though I'm a person that lives in my head and I'm much more comfortable with reading and intellectual pursuits, for yoga to have its true impact in my mind, it needs to be experienced. And you're just describing that. It's not something that you can just read about, think you're going to do it once or twice, and then you've done yoga. And
right.
What I have learned in my most in-depth study since really 2009, 2010, is it's the lifestyle. It's not just the movement. It's the breathing practices. It's the meditation. It's knowing what we call the yamas and the niyamas, which are kind of the ethical precepts, which guide you to how to eat healthfully, and that's right. Different for everybody, but having that awareness about yourself to know what is right for you. And, as somebody that was a rule follower most of her life, it even took me a long time in my training to learn that there was no right way. Because a guy like Iyengar, who was very alignment based in the poses, you could feel like you weren't doing them right. What he wanted to put across with the alignment, I believe, was the idea of safety in the average body. But correct. No one has an average body. We all have different bodies. So part of what I consider advanced yoga is learning what's right in your body and being comfortable with that adjustment. And that to me has been the emphasis of my past decade of learning, is getting away from something being right or wrong, whether that's a meditation principle or a movement position.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. I agree with you 100% on that. And actually, my mom, as a yoga teacher, she was very good at that. And she would say, yes, we're trying to achieve this kind of alignment, but your body may not, your bone structure, your muscle structure may not allow you to align in exactly that way. So let's find the right alignment for your body. And I thought, okay, that is the right way to do it. I mean, think about any sport, really. I don't care. Pick one that you've never even done, like javelin throwing, for example. I mean, maybe you have done it. I've never done that. I'm sure you could pick up a book that talks about javelin throwing, talks about all the technique and the right way to throw the javelin and this and that and the other thing. The fact of the matter is, your body might not be able to do the things that are recommended to get the best possible technique. Does that mean you shouldn't do javelin? Not necessarily. It just means you may not get the same result using that technique. You may have to find another technique that works better for you. And this is the thing that I think that you absolutely touched on, that we absolutely have to remember to remind people, hey, yoga is a personal practice. It's not a universal. I mean, it's universal in the sense that lots of people do it, but each person's practice is individual and unique to that person. That's what we have to remember.
Amen. Amen. And again, to me, years of study, I am finally at that point where I recognize that, because we all have that little inbuilt sense of perfectionism where we're comparing ourselves to others. And to me, that whole part of the veils falling away as you become wiser, a gift of wisdom, if you are, is that the only person that truly knows is you. It's within inside you to know what's best.
Right. Well, and you mentioned that you are someone who's into scientific, logical pursuits, intellectual pursuits, I think you said. And I am much the same way. I have a very, very scientific mind. And one of the things that I've been fascinated with recently is simulations, graphical simulations. And, you know, those are wonderful because we can come up with formulas, mathematical, scientifically provable formulas that can give you the simulation that you're looking for. But the simulation isn't the real thing. And when we do a simulation, we are ignoring lots of external factors. I mean, even Einstein, when he was talking about some of his great theories, he knew he made a mistake with that cosmological constant. You know, but he had to do something in order to make everything else work and in order to get us moving forward in a direction. So we have to remember that these scientific approaches are tools, but they're not meant to be devices that force us into a particular shape or size. They're just meant to help us understand how things work. That's really all they're for.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And again, I think I'm going to segue a little bit. You talked in the beginning about the medical establishment being slow to accept yoga. And I guess maybe it's because of where I'm working now. I actually am a yoga therapist for 4 hours a week at our local hospital where I work with oncology
That's wonderful.
patients. It's one-on-one. And you still see, it's almost generational. You can see the look of fear when you walk into somebody's room who's in their 80s or 90s and you say you're a yoga therapist. He's like, they'll look at you and say, like, look at me, I can't do a down dog. And it's like, no, we're just going to do a breath practice, or we'll do a guided meditation. And all I want to say about that is there are now organizations that are recognizing that. And there's actually a new field of study called lifestyle medicine. And I just find it interesting in the Western world, we have to put everything in little categories. So sometimes I will walk into a room, especially because I'll read the patient's chart beforehand. And again, it's personal. I may make some judgments about that person's background, and I may not even use the word yoga. I may just say, I'm here to offer a mind-body practice, because everybody understands mind-body practices now. And most of them, depending on what they are, have a genesis from the yoga tradition. I mean, even Buddhism comes after the tradition of the scriptures that created the yoga philosophies. So I've gotten to the point now where I am less worried about the words I use to define it, and again, helping somebody get into that experience. In the medical world, Society of Integrative Oncology, which I'm a member of, now has a yoga special interest group where yoga therapists work side by side. And they just this year came out in conjunction with the American Society of Cancer Research to call for an alternative modality for oncology patients that suffer from anxiety and depression, that yoga might be a modality that may be helpful. Now, again, everybody's different. Somebody like my husband is never going to sit down and do a meditation class. But when he learned some movements that I showed him that helped him improve his golf game, he's now, okay, show me more of that yoga stuff that may help me play golf better. So again, it's learning who you're with at the time and how these tools can help serve them for whatever their aims are.
Yeah.
I realized I
Well,
was all over the map on that.
right. So you talk about mind-body practice. I personally, I believe that we have to become more holistic in pretty much everything that we do. And for me, holism means heart, body, mind, and soul. And I make the distinction between the heart and the body because to me, the heart is an energetic space more than a physical space. And that's why I make the distinction. But anyway, I like this. You know, your husband is interested in the yoga moves that help him play better golf. For him, golf is probably the meditation.
I would never use those words to him, but that's exactly what I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you know, I think people have just as they have perhaps a misunderstanding of what yoga is, people also have a misunderstanding of what meditation is. I mean, what everybody has this vision in their mind. Well, not everybody, but many people have this vision in my mind. Yoga and meditation seem to go together. You have to do this weird lotus position and hold it forever, kind of thing. That's just do a search on an image site for yoga, and that's kind of what you'll see.
Right.
So that's the prevailing idea of what yoga and meditation are. But what I keep telling people, I say, first of all, meditation is nothing more than trying to stay present in the current moment. That's all it is. And it doesn't matter how you do that. You know, for every person on the planet, there's a way of doing it that works for that person. Yoga, on the other hand, is a little bit more disciplined. And so there are many different branches of yoga, many different ways of doing it. But ultimately, they all boil down to the same basic concepts. Moving the body in a way that helps to strengthen, increase flexibility, expand your awareness of what's going on in your body, all of that stuff. And that's really what I think yoga is all about. So don't try to paint a picture of what it means to do yoga or meditation. Just kind of open yourself to the possibility that maybe it's just a way for me to stay present. And in fact, if you think about it, what is yoga but a form of meditation that involves the body?
I couldn't agree more. In fact, my early teachers came from the Kripalu tradition,
Right.
and the word that they use is meditation in motion for that style of yoga. And
Right.
I absolutely believe it because it was that movement that had the young Denyse connecting to the existential questions of her time as she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do as a grown-up. So I just think there's tremendous power in it. And to your point, the fact that it changes on the individual. When you take yoga teacher training, depending on the school, it can be really rigorous, and you can come away with a bunch of shoulds that I should do physical movement X amount of times per day. I should do breathing practices X amount of time per day. I should sit on that pillow and meditate X amount of time per day. So when I went into my yoga teacher training, I know I did not have the discipline of those yoga teachers and those practices to do it X amount a day. And so even with my advanced training, I finally, a couple of years ago, said to one of my lifelong teachers, who's very well known in this area, I want you to know I'm really struggling. I don't do a breathing practice. And we were on Zoom. And she said, Denyse, I am tired of hearing you say what you don't do. She said, what's that I see behind you? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, those things standing up. I said, oh, they're Native American flutes. She said, that looks to me like that's a breath and meditation practice. I said, you know, you're absolutely right. And so now I don't worry about whether I've done a breath practice. I grab one of my flutes, and that's what I'll do for my breath practice. And I'm getting my extended exhale.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know,
so I think
and that's another topic that I find so fascinating too, is this whole idea of breathing practice. You know, I've had people say to me, well, what's the big deal about breathing? I do it all the time. I said, yes, you do. Your body, well, you don't do it, but your body does it all the time. It's just part of the body's function. But have you ever stopped to really think about your breath, or maybe examine what's actually going on as you're breathing? Have you ever done that? And a lot of people say no. Some people say, well, yeah, I kind of sort of have, you know. And I've tried, holding my breath. I've tried this, 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. I say, okay, so you've done some breathing practice. But have you ever just watched your breath and just Notice how your body feels as you inhale, as you exhale. Why do you think meditation teachers tell you to watch your breath? Primarily for one reason only, because the breath is happening right now. You know, you're not thinking about, oh, a moment ago I took a breath. You're not really thinking like that. You're noticing how your breathing is going right now. That's the reason that they focus on that. And when you get really good at that, maybe they'll say something like, okay, now focus on the flowing of your blood. Where's that blood going? And now you just kind of sit and think about the blood and try to follow it. You're bringing your attention to something that's happening right now. That's what it's all about. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a super fancy practice. You don't have to inhale, exhale a certain number of times. You don't have to, none of that stuff. Those are just ways of helping to bring you present. That they're just techniques. That's all they are. And they work for you or they don't.
Absolutely. And to me, what you just said, David, is spot on. When I was in my yoga therapy, and yoga therapy is really focusing more on the therapeutic aspects of yoga so that you can work one-on-one with individuals. Mm-hmm. And they may or may not have a chronic condition. Some people do it in the mental health field. There's a variety of areas where it can be applied. And I remember in the training, my chief instructor saying, well, you know, when in doubt, if somebody walks in and you're not sure, you don't feel like you know them or what to do, give them a breath practice. And I thought, how much money and time am I putting in to learn that? But now that I work in a hospital, no truer words have been spoken. In fact, last Friday, my husband was in the hospital for another procedure. He's got congestive heart failure, so he's always in and out of the hospital. And here the anesthesiologist comes in, and you know, we're kind of frequent flyers in this hospital. So she's like, "Oh, I recognize you," and she goes, "And by the way, your husband was telling me that you're a yoga therapist. Tell me a little bit about what a typical session would be." And so I told her, and she's like, "Well, do you think we could do this in the cardiac unit as well? Because," and this is the anesthesiologist. She's like, "Sometimes I feel like instead of drugging people, we should just teach them how to breathe." And I'm like, okay, the world is changing. Again, she's a younger person, but you're starting to see more and more of that application where I like to think that yoga connects us to what we forget about ourselves and about how life works, because we get distracted by so many different things. And being able to walk into a room where a patient is fretting about an MRI and just say, okay, I'm going to just show you a practice and let's do it together, see how it feels. You don't even have to tell them that this might be helpful with the MRI. After they do it for a few minutes, they're like, could I do this before I go into my MRI? And the answer is absolutely. But again, part of being a yoga therapist versus a yoga teacher in my mind is I'm not telling them what to do. I'm sharing an experience with them and letting them draw their own conclusion as to whether it applies to them or not. And if it doesn't, we'll work on how we tweak it.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful, really. I love that. I love that. And the fact that you've got someone saying that maybe we should be doing breathing exercises instead of drugging people, I mean, that is pretty amazing. That
I wanted to say, can I quote you, please?
Yeah, right.
What's your name?
Yeah. I just want to say again, thank you to all you folks who are here on the live presentation. I'm glad to have you here. Please feel free to put your comments or questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to respond to those as we proceed. So, okay, you mentioned that this person asked you to explain what a yoga therapist session would be like. Why don't you tell us here what that would be like?
Okay, well, I guess my my two words that I have learned in my training is it depends. And it's very, very individual focused. If I was a yoga therapist where I was working one-on-one with students in, say, a yoga studio, or I was inviting them into my home for an hour session, I would probably offer them a series or one or two intake forms so I could get to know them better, so I could get an appreciation for, would movement be a better practice versus a breath practice, you know. And again, I'm not going to pick one exclusively of the others, but we're going to pick one to start to find ways in which we might find ease for that individual. In a hospital setting, and I work both inpatient and outpatient, my sessions are more abbreviated. I don't do an intake form because guess what? In a hospital, those patients are getting surveys, they're getting so many questions from medical people. I'm actually, excuse the pun, a breath of fresh air, because all I'm doing is saying, do you want to sit and breathe? And sometimes we may not even do a yoga practice. Sometimes they may just open up to me as a non-medical person about some of the fears they have, about the worries about the family, whether the family will be able to deal with it. Some of them will say to me, I'm coping fine, but I worry about my family. And so again, I'm part of an organization where I can offer referrals to other people, but 9 times out of 10 in a hospital situation, I'm spending maybe 20 minutes tops, and I'm either offering a very simple, depending on the individual, breathing practice, a guided meditation to take them out of that present moment of worry, or and again, it depends on the individual. If they're not tethered to IVs or whatever, we may just do a movement of the joints practice just to connect with the body. So that's typically what it is. And in the hospital, I don't necessarily see people on a repeat basis. If I work with people privately one-on-one, we may work over five 1-hour sessions or something like that together to help that individual then build their own practice. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, I like that. That sounds like it's very much an individually structured program that's unique to every person that you work with.
Yes, and now a yoga therapist may also teach classes. So, for instance, when I was going through my training, I have type 2 diabetes myself. So I put together like a 5-week class for people that were interested in learning how various yoga tools might be helpful in either preventing or managing type 2 diabetes. And in that case, I picked practices that I found through scientific research, because there are a lot of articles out there now documenting evidence based on various yoga tools for different conditions, or what worked for myself personally. And, we explore whether that's something that would work with an individual.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, what sounds like you walk your talk. That is to say, you have this holistic approach to yoga, and you bring that to bear within your client arrangements.
That's what I aspire to. Now, do I actually do that? I don't know. I mean, I that's what I try to do. And again, a lot of what I do with students, like for instance, during the pandemic, I started teaching a chair yoga class, which includes, and this is all seniors. I think everybody in the class, with maybe exception of 1 or 2, are over age 60. But one of the things that I have learned to do, and again, it was from teaching classes at a residential retirement community, was something called chair yoga dance. And you may look at that and say, well, that's not yoga. What's with this pop music and moving to that? Well, I'm taking movement based on moving the joints that we do in a chair yoga class, and I'm trying to connect students to what's important for them. So when I taught at a senior facility, for instance, I asked the members of the class what songs brought back memories. Most of them picked songs from their early 20s and teen years, and then I created movements for those songs. And that created a sense of joy that wasn't there originally. There was one woman in particular that I think of. When I would walk into class, she was always the first one there, and she was all hunched over, and I'd say, welcome to class. And she's like, oh, I have nowhere else to be. What else am I going to do? Well, after a 10-week session, she brought her daughter who was visiting, and her daughter said, I don't know what you're doing, but my mother loves this class and she's really changed. I believe it was the chair yoga dance, because she loved moving to music that resonated with her. Now, that might not be the music that resonates with me, but it was for her, and she got movement, joy, the sounds that were reminiscent of a different time in her life, and it's just so much fun.
Yeah. Well, I have a different interpretation of what happened for that lady. I think, I'm speaking from my own personal experience right now. I already explained to you about my rebelliousness against my mother. That rebelliousness for me was 100% ego. Once I was able to get my ego out of the way, then I was able to see yoga in a whole new way, and whatever it was I was being offered, and I was able to be more open to it. So I think that lady, somebody told her she had to be there, and she didn't want to be doing something that somebody else told her to do. And so her ego was in resistance. But something about your presence and the way you taught the class allowed her to see, all right, she's not forcing me to do anything. Maybe this is an okay place for me to be. And I think that's kind of what happened. She just began opening up and allowing her ego to get out of the way. All of us, without exception, even the most advanced and most enlightened of us have egos that we have to deal with, unless we're not in the physical plane and maybe just purely spiritual beings. But as long as we remain here in the physical plane, we have to deal with that ego. And so I try to remind people, all right, just notice that you've got an ego. Don't try and fight it. Just, hey, you got an ego. What is your ego afraid of? That's usually what is motivating things.
The messenger.
Yeah. And the ego, when the ego is afraid of something, and usually the ego is afraid, and it's saying things like, if you do this, people will do that. People will judge you. People will blah, 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 blah. You're going to be seen as not good enough, whatever. The ego has all kinds of different ways of saying those things, and all of us have experienced that. And so the thing is, we don't want to appear bad or wrong or anything like that. So we put on these masks and costumes and pretend things to make ourselves look better than we really are in the eyes of other people. And the irony is, this is the really funny part. If we all just paused and think about this for a moment, everybody can see through all of the bullshit that I put in front of me. It's kind of ridiculous, but we do it anyway, right?
Absolutely.
So what we have to do is maybe learn to befriend the ego, love the ego, and allow the ego to be treated like a little child who just wants some unconditional love. That's what I teach my people to do.
Yeah.
Because once you do that, then the ego tends to kind of be more willing to take a back seat. And so your true essence, your true spiritual, beautiful nature can come out and then take advantage of all these beautiful things that are out here in the world.
I so agree with that. And one of my long-term teachers, one of the things that I learned early on, because I came from a stressful work environment, was the power of restorative yoga. And I actually studied with a woman by the name of Judith Hansen Lassiter, who's pretty well known, and she's an Iyengar student. But she talks about having, in a period of grief, realized that her regular yoga practice wasn't going to suit her. So she has what I call nap time for adults, where you bring all the bolsters in and the blankets and you just relax. And so right. I took that training from her, and she was talking again, even in that state of relaxation, how that ego will come in and, again, am I doing this right? Am I not doing this right? So the way she learned to befriend her ego is recognize, as you said, no judgment. It's part of you. And so she said, when I would see things that would aggravate my ego, I would just say, oh, how human of me. Oh, right. Isn't it wonderful that I'm human? How human of me. So that's been my little tool that I use when I recognize it in myself, is say, oh, how human of me. That's
great. And you talked about one of the comments you made a little while back was, I paid all this time and money to learn that. And yet isn't that the way it usually goes? The things right. that you remember that are most important to you came about as part of something else that, maybe you don't really resonate with all the rest of that stuff. But that one thing, you might never have gotten that if not for having participated in that class.
Absolutely.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. And I guess the other thing that I have learned to appreciate is, yoga has a lot of texts that go back thousands of years. And the one that's probably the most famous is something called the Yoga Sutras, which is
Right.
the original guidelines, which are really, it's not a story, it's a set of guidelines of how to live a good life.
Right.
And every yoga teacher training you go through, you read the Yoga Sutras, you read various versions and whatnot. And until I actually studied with Nischala Joy Devi, who wrote a woman's version of the sutras, did I get it. Now, I had read this book, I don't know, tens of times, certainly more than once. And I read it and it's like, okay, yeah, I got it. But it was only through studying with her repeatedly. And then what I learned is when I had my type 2 diabetes diagnosis, and I was thinking about the breadth of yoga beyond the physical movements, how could I pick some of those sutras and see how it applied to how I managed my type 2 diabetes? And so a couple years ago, I actually sat down, and again, using her text because I like her translation the best, I took the 10 precepts of the yamas and the niyamas and translated that into how those precepts or guidances could help me better manage my type 2 diabetes. And I invite anybody, because a big part of yoga is that self-discovery, that self-learning, which is part of life and our own growth, whether it's yoga or something else, is to find those ways to nourish yourself so that you grow and so that you can learn from it to benefit your overall well-being. And that's really what it's all about.
Right, right. So you've just hit on another really, really important point here, I think. That's just my judgment, my opinion, if you like. But my point is that, isn't it interesting how sometimes as we go through life, we hear the same thing over and over from different sources, and it's not until a particular voice comes along that it finally registers. And when that registers, then some of us, I certainly have had this happen in my life, can remember, oh my God, that's what that person was telling me. That's what that person was telling me. And I couldn't hear it until now.
Right.
So I want to reverse this now. I want to reverse this. As an individual trying to live a decent life, sometimes I hold myself back from saying things that I believe might not be what someone else wants to hear. What am I? I am actually withholding something that might need to come from me for that person to hear it for the very first time. Think about that for a moment. In other words, when you are feeling called to say something and you also have that simultaneous urge to pull back, okay, take a look at that urge to pull back, but ask yourself, is this really me or is this my ego? Because your heart wants to speak something and your ego might be shutting you down. So speak your truth and look for the most compassionate and gentle way you can to say it. That's really all I can offer. But I think that's so important.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And again, it's to your point of what I'll call the aha moment. It's what is it, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yep.
And so you could be reading
Well, I've also reversed that too. When the teacher is ready, the student will appear.
There you go. That happens too. And
Yep.
I'm a big believer in that. Absolutely.
Right.
And I guess, now at the ripe old age of 70, I guess the one thing I've learned is I don't anticipate. I am much better at suspending my judgment, if you will, and saying, what do I really know? Let's just see. Let's see.
Yeah.
What
Here's
is
another
meant to
thing
appear will appear.
that I want. Yeah, that just popped into my mind. I remember when I was younger, when I was in my 20s or whatever, it seemed like all the people who had something to teach me were always older than me. But the older I get, the more I find that people younger than me have a huge amount to teach.
Yes.
And I learned so much from my own children, So my point here is that there are always going to be teachers out there for you. But don't be surprised if the teaching comes from someone you least expect it from. And it may not even come from a person. It may come from, a plant or an animal or some situation that just happens in your life. Allow yourself to be open to the gifts of wisdom that come to you through so many different sources.
Absolutely. What a perfect title for a book, Gifts of Wisdom.
Yeah, it is. It's a great title for a book. I'm sure glad we took it, and I'm sure glad we're going to be making that book happen in October of this year. Hopefully, all these folks will sign up and grab a copy of that. What chapter are you in? I can't remember right off the top
Chapter
of my head.
5. Chapter
Chapter
5.
5, and it's Yoga Nidra, right? Is the title of
Yoga
your?
Nidra, because again, that's another one that I took me 3 different trainings before the benefit took. So I have 2 super duper certifications in Yoga Nidra, and it was really Kamini Desai's interpretation of that and also her father is the founder of Kripalu, which took me back to my journey of 1970 and coming into yoga, and then eventually going to the Kripalu Institute in Massachusetts in the mid 80s and experiencing Yoga Nidra for the first time. That was the impetus for my chapter.
Yeah, I know, and it's a beautiful chapter. I loved reading it. Just for the audience, could you briefly describe what is Yoga Nidra and why would they want to be finding out about it?
So Yoga Nidra loosely translates as yogic sleep. And what it is meant to do is put you into a state of a deep rest, but and not everybody, if you're somebody that's really stressed out in life, you could just fall asleep. But to be aware. And there's an underlying principle in yoga called the koshas, which are the 5 layers of being. And basically, this meditation takes you through each layer to help you rest in both your physical, energetic, mental, the mind and bliss. And the essence is when you get deepest into the meditation, and again, it doesn't happen to everybody, it takes a long time. That's when you are fully relaxed, fully balanced, and you can connect with your true self. And so I don't often give that full a definition to somebody coming into it, because that in itself can be intimidating. But when you experience it, it is truly remarkable. And
Right.
even today, I can listen to a Yoga Nidra and have no impact in terms of how it impacts me. And then there's some times where it'll take me deep. So it's whatever I need in the moment that shows up.
Yeah, I know. It's a beautiful experience when you can get there, for sure. This idea of bliss is something that is very, very difficult for anybody to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it.
Right.
It's not like, the joy of, jumping up and down and getting all excited. Not at all. It's more like this deep sense of contentment that has you have no sense of need or want or desire. It's just everything is perfect as it is.
The rightness of things.
That's how I describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like being at the bottom or at the center of a very, very still ocean. You're just kind of there. You're floating in this beautiful, still ocean. There's no waves. There's no movement really at all, other than maybe the individual quarks and other quantum things that are moving around to keep things going. But other than, it's a beautiful experience.
Absolutely. And again, I wasn't even aware at the time, this was the mid 80s, that I was even doing a Yoga Nidra until
Right.
years later when I did it in my 50s. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what we did. And it was actually in a workshop by one of the lead teachers of Kripalu at the time, who right now is a very famous teacher, and he's actually in the DC area. And when I moved to the DC area and I walked in, I reminded him about being in that class and how I had experienced it. And he was very gracious. I thought, he probably thinks I'm a groupie or something, but I am kind of a yoga junkie that way.
Well, I think we all have our own form of I wouldn't want to use the word junkiness, because that kind of implies there's a negative aspect to it. But we all have those aspects of our lives that are really, really important and dear to us, without necessarily being an addiction, and I know for me personally, it's really about spiritual awareness, spiritual depth, finding out more about who I really am and where I am in the universe and how I fit in and all that kind of stuff. that is something that I'm doing all the time.
Yes.
And I think you are too. I mean, that's really, isn't that what we're here for?
Yeah, but it takes, for some of us, it takes a long time to figure it out. I'm one of those people.
Yep, me too. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think part of why you and I are here is to share what we have learned so that maybe other people who are coming up behind us, when I say behind, I mean they're lower in age, for example, maybe don't have as much physical experience on this plane. I hope, my want is for everyone to wake up to the deepest truth of who they really are as early as possible in their life. Because
Absolutely.
the sooner you get there, the better everything is from that point forward.
Couldn't agree more. I wholeheartedly embrace what you just said.
Yeah. And if it takes you a little bit longer, that's okay too. I mean, you can still have a great life up to the time that you really understand the truth of who you really are. And maybe that great life involves a lot of bizarre, twisty detours that maybe aren't so pleasant. You know, think about this. I mean, I know you've had some of these experiences too, Denyse. I look at my life now and I think, I don't think I'd want to go through that experience again, but I sure am grateful that I went through it because it's
Yeah.
helped me to get where I am here today. Does it mean I couldn't have got here through some other path? No. It just means that this particular path brought me here. And that's all it means. And so I'm very grateful for where I am now. That's really what I want to say about that.
Could not agree with you more. I didn't realize we were such kindred spirits in our thinking.
Oh, well, we are in many, many different ways. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been working together on this book.
Right, right.
So we're getting close to the end here, and I want to give you a chance to, first of all, I understand that you have an offer that you'd like to share for the people who are here. Do you want to talk a little bit about that right now?
Well, I can do that. I mean, I mentioned that, and I did this, and I actually just remembered it as I was preparing for this talk. I created a little PDF abstract. It's about 17 pages. It's personal to me, but it looks at the yamas and the niyamas, which are the two ethical principles that are the basis of the yoga philosophy. And I talked about Nishala Joy Devi's translation, as well as another teacher I've studied with that she takes a look at the neuroscience around some of this. And I then translated their translation into what it means for me as I live with type 2 diabetes and what it means for a lifestyle and how I try to embody that philosophy. So if anybody's interested, it's like I said, it's about a 17-page PDF. I'd be happy to email it to anybody that would like to read it. It's not published. I just kind of did it for fun because I do volunteer at a local hospital. I teach yoga tools for stress management to prevent type 2 diabetes. And this was one of the bases I used to say, okay, what do I really mean when I say that? Not just the exercises, but philosophically, how do I live my life? So happy to share that if people are interested.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And so do you have a title for that yet?
It's called Yoga as Lifestyle Practice for Diabetes. And when I say
think
diabetes,
that's perfect. And I would really encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to upload that to your website, make it available as a downloadable link. And that way people can go to it and just sign up for it and get it that way.
Now you just expanded my lack of expertise in technology because I don't even know how to do that. But I have, as a result of working on this book, I have met someone. So maybe
Good.
I will ask her to help me do that. But I
think that would be awesome. And then that way people can just sign up and they can get it right from your website, and it's a free download basically. That's the best way to do it. But in the meantime, I will give people your email address and they can contact you to get a hold of that. So
absolutely. But that's a good idea because I also want to put a link in because as part of your book, you're going to have a website and I'll have a different offering on there. It'll be related to the chapter in the book and it will be regarding intention setting. So
yeah, beautiful.
practice I'll offer.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, Denyse, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a great, great conversation. I've loved the way it's kind of gone all over the place, and we've talked about all kinds of great stuff.
Did I
That's
tell
the
you
way
I
I like
babied?
these conversations to go. uh, do you have any final words you'd like to share before I close us out today?
I don't think so. I just want to say what an honor it's been to be part of this journey with you, and especially you helped me fulfill a lifetime dream to be a published author eventually. A couple more months, right?
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, then, thank you again, Denyse, for being here. It's been just absolutely fabulous. And folks, for you who are here, just remember you can gain a clear understanding of how yoga can be a powerful tool for managing chronic conditions and enhancing overall well-being. You can learn how holistic practices address the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of health and can lead to a more balanced and fulfilled life. I encourage you to take an active role in your health journey and bring these insights into your daily routine. Thank you all for watching today's program. Remember, you can catch the recordings of this and every other episode on my website at lifemasterytv.com. And finally, friends, I invite you to remember to practice my life mastery mantra every single day. It's real simple. It goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. Until we meet again, I'm David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. We'll see you next time on Life Mastery TV. Bye-bye.